Closing is not the end, understanding ongoing responsibilities. While closing marks the transfer of ownership, it does not always mark the end of legal obligations. Many commercial real estate transactions continue to carry responsibilities, risks, and potential liabilities even after the deal is completed. This final section of Chapter 3 brings everything together by emphasizing that a well-managed transaction extends beyond closing. Agents, buyers, and sellers must understand what survives closing and what risks remain. This ties directly to AAC R4 28-1101, which requires ongoing honesty, accuracy, and professionalism, and ARS Paragraph 32-1253, which outlines disciplinary consequences for misrepresentation, even after a transaction has closed. Survival clauses. What lives beyond closing? Commercial contracts often include survival clauses, which specify that certain provisions remain enforceable after closing. These may include representations, warranties, indemnification provisions, and confidentiality agreements. For example, if a seller provides a warranty that there are no known environmental issues, and that warranty survives closing, the buyer may have legal recourse if a problem is discovered later. This concept is critical because many agents and clients mistakenly believe that all obligations end at closing. In reality, some of the most significant liabilities may arise afterward. Post-closing discovery. When problems surface. Later. One of the most common sources of disputes is the discovery of issues after closing. These may include undisclosed defects, inaccurate financial information, or title-related problems. For example, a buyer purchases a commercial property in Phoenix and later discovers that the seller failed to disclose ongoing structural issues. If the issue was known and not disclosed, the buyer may have grounds for legal action. This ties directly to Hill v. Jones, which reinforces the obligation to disclose known material defects and highlights that failure to disclose can result in liability even after closing. Indemnification, shifting the risk. Indemnification clauses are used to allocate risk between the parties. These provisions require one party to compensate the other for certain losses or damages. For example, a seller may agree to indemnify the buyer for any liabilities arising from pre-existing environmental conditions. If contamination is discovered after closing, the seller may be responsible for the costs. Indemnification provisions are heavily negotiated in commercial transactions and can significantly impact post-closing liability. Tenant and lease obligations, ongoing responsibilities. In commercial real estate, many transactions involve income-producing properties with existing tenants. This creates ongoing obligations that transfer to the buyer at closing. For example, a buyer who acquires a multi-tenant retail center in Chandler inherits all existing lease agreements. This includes honoring lease terms, managing tenant relationships, and addressing any ongoing issues. If the seller misrepresented lease terms or tenant stability, this can lead to post-closing disputes. This connects back to Lombardo versus Albu, which emphasizes the importance of disclosing financial and performance-related information, record-keeping and compliance, protecting the agent. Even after closing, agents must maintain proper records of the transaction. Under ARS Paragraph 32-2151.01, brokers are required to retain transaction records for a specified period. These records may become critical if a dispute arises after closing. For example, if a buyer claims that certain disclosures were not provided, the agent must be able to produce documentation showing compliance. Proper record keeping is one of the most effective ways to protect against liability. Risk management strategies. Preventing future issues. The best way to handle post-closing liability is to prevent it in the first place. This includes ensuring all disclosures are complete and accurate, documenting all communications and decisions, recommending professional inspections and expert advice, verifying information rather than relying on assumptions. These practices align with ADRI Substantive Policy Statement 2005. 13, which emphasizes the importance of recommending outside experts when appropriate. For example, encouraging a buyer to obtain a professional environmental assessment can prevent future disputes related to contamination. Real-world scenario. When post-closing liability arises. Consider a buyer who purchases a commercial warehouse in Mesa. After closing, the buyer discovers that the property has significant electrical issues that were known to the seller but not disclosed. The buyer files a claim against the seller for misrepresentation. The outcome of the case depends on the contract terms, disclosures, and documentation maintained during the transaction. This example highlights how post-closing issues often trace back to actions or inactions taken before closing. The agent's final responsibility: professionalism. Beyond the transaction, agents must recognize that their role does not necessarily end at closing. Providing guidance, maintaining records, and ensuring compliance are ongoing responsibilities. This is especially important in commercial real estate, where transactions are complex and stakes are high. Agents who approach transactions with a long-term perspective, focusing on accuracy, transparency, and risk management, are better positioned to protect their clients and their careers. Bringing Chapter 3 together from start to finish. Chapter 3 has taken us through the full life cycle of contract performance. We began with timelines and cure periods, moved into default and remedies, explored closing and execution, and now conclude with post-closing obligations and liability. Together, these sections illustrate that a commercial real estate contract is not just a document, it is a living process that requires active management from start to finish and beyond. As we move into Chapter 4, we will shift our focus to advanced contract strategies and negotiation techniques, where these foundational principles are applied to maximize outcomes and minimize risk in complex commercial transactions. Online discussion. Why do some contract provisions survive closing? Answer: because certain obligations, such as warranties and indemnification, are intended to protect the parties even after ownership transfers, ensuring accountability for prior representations. What is indemnification in a commercial contract? Answer: indemnification is a provision that requires one party to compensate the other for specific losses or damages, often related to pre-existing conditions or undisclosed issues. Why is record-keeping important after closing? Answer: because transaction records may be needed to defend against claims or disputes that arise after closing, ensuring compliance with legal and regulatory requirements.